Once upon a time, there was a kingdom known as Albion. It was ancient and new. A world of magic and bandits and heroes. A dangerous, beautiful place to spin a video game in. That is deceptively good.
Whoa, back it up, Dad.
Hold on there, narrator. You can't just go say the name of the video 5 seconds in. You have to build it up. This is an amateur hour, my friend. So let's go back. Way back. Fable 1 is this game nobody really talks about anymore. It used to be kind of a big dealio years ago on that first Microsoft console, and the franchise was one of the smaller feathers in Microsoft's hat that gave X-Boy Mountain Dew gamer boys something to do rather than play Halo all day. That was until Fable 3. But we ain't talking about those games, we're talking about this game. Why did this game matter to gamers at the time, and why does barely anyone talk about this game? I don't know the second part. We're just gonna talk about the first part, okay? And about the first part. The first part, I'm gonna explain it in the video. I'm gonna set the stage. Big Western fantasy RPGs were a PC thing. If you wanted the big boys like Daggerfall or Baldur's Gate, throw that Sega Saturn out the window. It's time. But with the increase of the power of systems, as well as the increase in technology in general, means we can now go way beyond what we did before. We could have characters with good facial animations, a large RPG on consoles, your custom character in a cutscene just like you like them. What? That's exactly what I was wanting, man! So that's why Fable was so special. Came in a time where all console players knew was filthy JRPGs. So Morrowind and Fable were kind of a revolution for consoles, even though they couldn't be more different from each other. So that's where we begin. A leap of technology forward into the world of Albion. Playing this on PC, by the way, because the loading screens on OG Xbox and Anniversary Edition looks kinda, you know. Oh my gosh! What happened to the children? First things first, the setting is amazing. They paid off veteran Hollywood musician Danny Elfman to make the main theme with about 10,000 Doritos Locos Tacos, allegedly. And his style really sets the mood for the game. But the game is mostly scored brilliantly by Russell Shaw. The music is the main character in the game. They put these different styles into these landscapes in a way that complements the graphical style and art design perfectly, like whimsical, hopeful, spiritual, frightening, and adventurous. This game is about being in a storybook fairy tale. You are in a world like the Disney princesses, the Sword in the Stone. The classic fantasy cartoons that colored our youth are brought to life in this with a darker edge. The graphical style of the character models, the facial expressions and animated eyes, the color choices and environmental detail all inform you, the player, of where you are, a child's storybook. The game embraces its role-playing from the first cutscene, acknowledging the power fantasy of the main character as a child wanting to grow up to be a medieval legend, whether it be a wizard or a knight, which is what the player wants as well, feeding that primal urge to be something great. Just walking around cements you in the world. The towns bustle with the busyness as people go around their day-to-day lives. The awkward occasional clap of a bystander becomes a roaring thunderous applause and infatuation later in the game as your accomplishments grow. Your character reflects the actions you make, from moral to your defeats and even your size. You will be enchanted in this world from the word go if you like this sorts of thing in other media. The world feels more real than many other games that have far more content and more fidelity just because it nails the aesthetic perfectly, enhancing the silly and sometimes scary adventures rooted in British folklore. You can pull a sword out of a stone, you can kill a werewolf with a special silver jewel, you can fight a mighty giant or kill a bandit king in revenge. Many scenarios from your story time as a child are present here and feel very cozy in the nearly perfectly executed setting. Graphical fidelity and presentation were king here, and it shows. These stylized models, beautiful water, and magic effects still look good all these years later, but unfortunately it came with a cost. Fable outclassed pretty much any game in its generation on consoles in terms of graphics, but the cost was awful loading screens. Unlike a game like KOTOR, in which areas are much bigger but have long loading screens, the areas are small in Fable, and the loading screens are still long too. This is a huge detriment to the original Xbox version, but the PC version has nearly instant load times. This doesn't excuse the flawed Xbox version, but unfortunately the truth is, games that chase graphical finesse at the expense of performance are usually ported to PC, and often next-gen consoles where their performance is bumped. Meaning, it gets to have its cake and eat it too. So if you choose the right flaws to put into the game, eventually your game might be perfect. These are strange times, young Padawan. But how's that gameplay, you might ask? It's pretty good. You got various spells, weapons, armors, and different playstyles to vary things up. There's different enemy types revealed through the game, and bosses to change up gameplay. And even if the bosses are fairly simple mechanically, they still offer spectacle and the feeling of accomplishment, as well as slightly different movesets from the normal troops. The drip of experience in getting new gear is real, and it drives the player forward. You get to chop people's heads off. It's pretty cool. The combat can be described as satisfying if a bit dull, especially towards the end with the long health bars replacing any interesting combat. There's not much strategy, but there is a lot of choices, which is always good, especially when the choices are fun. On the negative, this game is far too easy, and is often called a baby's RPG. This description of the mechanics may not be too far off, but I'm here to explain why that's not necessarily bad. Yes, I, the man whose heart races when he sees the gratifying numbers and complete agency given by Fallout 1 and 2's character customization screens. I'm about to explain why Fable's RPG mechanics are still good. The pleasing part of any RPG's customization screen is that you can really do whatever you want, and you are essentially choosing what type of adventure you're about to go on, and how you will play it from the first screen. Every digit affects that experience. It's all rooted in D&D goodness, which is all fine and good, but I would say Fable 1 isn't a CRPG proper. The game starts off with no character customization, no choice of how you look or who you are. There are no classes, no skill points. The game starts from Oakville as the player character, and it ends in the same place for everyone. You can pretty much upgrade in any direction, anytime in the game, as long as there's still enough XP to grind. But, you say, how can this be a pleasing experience as an RPG? Because it takes its simplistic mechanics and runs with it in a way that no other game does. The game is an RPG mixed with some sim elements put into the context of the theme of the game, your ego. Every menu, every chapter of the story, every mission complete, every upgrade reminds you that you are the core of this universe. You have a silent protag, but your protagonist still has set boundaries. He's not whatever you want. He was a boy that lived in Oakville. He has emotions like crying at the loss of his parents or being surprised separate from the player's control. He reminds me a lot of the fairly well characterized silent protag Link from Wind Waker. Both games have expressive silent protags that are indeed a real character with decisions and reactions that you, the player, might not have. The difference, of course, being in Fable that you can steer his course where you want. The result being you are watching a story of a set character that's a fairly blank slate playout, in which you fill in the blanks. Your armor choice, your moral choice, your tattoos, all of these follow you to every town, every cutscene. This character is you, yes, but is distinctly separate from you in many respects. You play the game in third person, separating you from him on a small level. You can't say what you want, you really can't say anything at all. You are stuck with this player character, this model, and his story the same way he is. He didn't choose for Oakville to be destroyed, but you didn't choose it either. You are both wrapped by fate into this adventure and must play the role you are given, with a lot of freedom, of course. You choose which path he goes down, but ultimately the path was created by the plot. The continual reminder of your choices and your popularity drive you to seek more, and further add to your relationship with the player character. You become almost obsessive with this character, his scars, his hair, his armor, the perception of his looks, how many evil deeds a good run can get away with. All of this is in the mind of a decently observant player who understands the systems. Owning property and marrying are important mechanics that feel needed not because of their depth, because they are somewhat lacking in depth, but their function is necessary in role-playing out your ego. Every choice matters to your character, making him a billboard for your successes and failures rather than showing drastic choices play out in the world. It's actually smart resource management on the developer's part, because though I think the game should have more choices that affect the world in interesting ways, every choice you make follows you everywhere with every interaction with an NPC. Might I add that this obsessive nature does not extend if there were other playable main character models. There was preset sliders in Fable. It would diminish the obsessive egocentric nature of the game. Your choices make him the way he is, so you know what he looks like. Old, young, fat, skinny, evil or good. You having the same starting point every time means your obsessive goals, whatever they be, are constantly being reminded to you just by looking at his face. Your successes and failures to live up to your own dream are easily shown, because you know him every playthrough. If you had 20 different characters or a character from scratch, it would break the connection the player has to that character from childhood and through multiple playthroughs. Not to mention the game would have likely lost the presence of your chosen character during the menus and UI because it would involve a lot of work. The player character is always the same except for what you make him do. You, the player, are dealt the same hand the character is. He can't choose where he was born or who he is, neither can you. It gives more importance and a stronger hold to the Chosen One archetype because this Chosen One can't be just anyone. He has to be the exact person you play as. There is no screen deciding on who you are. You are who you were meant to be, and within that boundary, you choose what path you want. The ease of upgrading goes back to the fact that this is a child's fantasy. If you want to switch to a wizard mid-game rather than an archer, then who's the game to stop you? The game is there to facilitate the dream, to realize the promise of the setting. The goal of the game is your accomplishments and the growth of yourself. Any boundaries in the way of that in a game with this setting, mechanics, and story would feel reductive. So the game does not lack depth as if it's missing it. It lacks depth as a design decision. To a child, the dream to become a Fable would come to pass easily like receiving a gift. And we obviously know that there is a huge journey from child to legend to take place, but that earnestness and eagerness to become great quickly is shown in the upgrade system. You upgrade quickly and in large chunks, not with small divisible skills to separate you from the gratification of upgrading. There is no real negatives to choose when upgrading your character, unlike traditional RPGs where you start weak and become strong, where even when you were powerful at the end it meant that you were only powerful in what you choose. You don't have the same areas of lost paths you could have taken in Fable. Sure, if you don't upgrade to be able to steal, you miss out on gameplay opportunities, but if you suddenly want that perk, change your playstyle and get skill XP and become just as proficient at it as somebody who wanted to be a thief from the outset. It feels good to be able to become powerful in most facets you want without much restriction, and I think that's the goal. Now you might say if the journey to get there is too easy, however, then that would definitely not gel with the simplistic design. So is the upgrading journey easy? Well, yes and no. They balance the level ups correctly and make it to where you don't become insanely powerful until the very end. But the problem with this game is you don't really need to be insanely powerful for it to be easy. It's very hard to die in this game after you get a good amount of gear, and there's spells like Time Slow available from the beginning of the game that break the game. The resurrection files in particular seem like a mechanic that could have been taken out, or at least put a limit on, because it does break the game when you only get 3 or 4. The easy access to potions isn't balanced either. As many missions are fairly short, you have unlimited inventory space, and potions are for sale on every corner. To give you an idea of the prevalence of potions, upon beating the original story in TLC, I had about 70 health potions in my inventory without even attempting to stockpile before the original boss fight ending. The difficulty is a definite hole in this experience, and it gets worse as the game goes on, especially in TLC where it just becomes a grind to kill without really a chance of dying. When you first start the game, it's a little bit more challenging, especially when you do things above your level. The game feels rewarding and a lot more fun. The difficulty is a substantial gripe in an otherwise good game, but it crimples certain sections of the game, in particular the late game, to be so boring despite having interesting baddies to fight. Other problems include the lack of being able to fail. They make it to where you can't fail in most missions, which is kind of a shame in a world based on consequences and ego. The bizarre thing is that there are missions you can fail, and it has mechanically sound repercussions. You lose renown, the thing that grants you quests and social abilities, which makes you less of a hero. damaging your ego. This should have been done for every quest that doesn't involve the player's death. The traders through Darkwood quest should have allowed all of the merchants to die, showing early in the game that there are consequences for your failure. It would also harm you in making you grind to get the next quest by getting more renown by facing normal enemies. Who cares if this makes the game shorter by allowing you to basically skip missions? It would make the game better, and the game is already fairly short. I can imagine kids teasing you for your failures and even bards mentioning them in songs if you were that much of a screw-up. Imagine walking into towns and getting booze. You would have to add a new renown system element that makes these ideas work, but I think it would definitely play into the mechanics well, on top of pushing the player to do better. Regardless of whether they added failure renown, however, every quest that doesn't revolve around the player's survival should be able to fail in the way those in the base game can be. Another problem that I'm surprised got past playtesting is every evil NPC giving you good points for killing them, and every evil NPC usually being a hostile. If you were on a quest where there was a choice between good and evil, or specifically putting your neck out on purpose to fight bad guys rather than just being attacked, I could understand, but as it stands, it's much harder to be evil or in the middle because you are always earning good points. The lack of being able to have kids is a problem too, and I don't know why it wasn't implemented, besides time or possibly the idea that they didn't want this to be some sissy game where you couldn't kill kids, so they just locked them all in Bowerstone. There's plenty of flaws to do with the broken promises of the game, but I didn't know some of these grand promises when I played the game. Peter Molyneux broke a lot of goodwill with the gamers by breaking promises, but games are a development with time and hardware limitations. This thing was moved from one console to another. Many of these proposed ideas were worked on and were ambitious, so I give them some slack for cutting many of them. They, however, never really tried that hard to implement broken promises in TLC or Fable 2. So I am less forgiving. I don't personally hold anger over these broken promises. I look at them as interesting windows into game development and deceptive marketing, but I understand those who are let down by Molyneux's sweet little lies. The thing is, the game that we got is pretty good, and doesn't feel like it's missing that much in a "this game was made in 1 year" way. I would have liked having children and more quests, but we got more quests in TLC. There's features promised that would have been cool, but they don't necessarily feel missing. Another negative, ranged weapon playthroughs are broken. Using ranged as your main weapons does not have enough dimensions, it's repetitive and dull, and the enemies are too spongy, while also encouraging the player to stay farther away from the action. Also, why do I have to hold to collect XP? This is just annoying. Why do I have to do that? Why am I doing? Now out of the negatives. The narrative is a win for simplistic storytelling. There's nothing revolutionary about it, but it's very effective in making us care about the hero's journey. Who cares if the story is simple? The original Star Wars is simple, but it's pulled off in an effective way, and honestly, the story reminds me of Star Wars a lot. By making much of what happens to the main character be a part of a chosen one and family story, it makes you and the main character feel tied to the world in a strong way. These archetypal time-tested ideas make you feel a certain way. The orphaned kid, the discovery of a lost sibling, the twist of important heritage. All of these are boilerplate story mechanism made better by the game's good presentation and your attachment to the main character, the sum of your work. You also aren't told to feel an exact way because of the lack of a voiced protagonist. You might not feel the same exact way about these events as the developers want, but the idea that your sister is alive does drive you forward regardless of how you feel about her. The reveal of your parentage does evoke feeling, even if you're only invested in your character because of the mechanics of the game, not the story. That's where the story is almost cheating in a way. It's using you, the player, whom you already have an attachment to, and familial ties and emotions of revenge to really drive the story home. It's making you feel things whether you want to or not. Some may call that manipulative. I call it singles night at Applebee's. Anyway, the story ends up being about an ultra-powerful sword MacGuffin which fits the power fantasy aspects of the game well. The villain is good too. He's a charismatic ancient hero legend from an age of powerful heroes, and even before, with an imposing presence and wit. You race to get the sword before he does and avenge what he did to your family. You also find him in the lore books before even meeting him, making it feel like you're living in a legend in which the ancient heroes come back to gain power. The storybook is truly coming to life. One thing that always slightly bothered me is the small retcon of the killing of your family. It ends up not all your family is killed. which lessens the impact at the beginning, but it's not like they went on vacation or something. Your sister got her eyes chopped out and had to become a servant of evil bandits for years. Your mom had to go to Jack of Blades' dark dungeon and get interrogated by him for years.
Why'd you do that, Jack? Why'd you do that, Jack?
What led to you being so sick? So in the end, I guess they would have been better dying off, honestly. So it's actually worse in that way. And he just kills your mom anyway.
Why, Jack? She brought you so much joy. So sick.
But the end of the base game is a great way to end a story when considering the premise. Some people might think there's only 2 endings in one scenario, so it's a bad RPG. No! This story is about a boy wanting to grow up and be a powerful hero. He lives out his fantasies, role-playing as good or evil in his daydreams, thinking that being a hero is a game. He soon realizes that the journey there may not be as fun as he once thought. His village burns. His dad dies. Even the cool uncle betrays you. What a letdown, man! The world is a lot darker than he once thought. Much darker than that of the romanticized view of a hero epic told to children. In the end, he must chase down a powerful sword to keep it from falling into evil hands. But who's to say the hero is good? You see, being totally evil is the quickest way to power in this game, and most don't choose that route, but hey, almost everyone kills a couple of innocent people to progress a quest, or break down a door because somebody made you mad. Did anybody not steal this blue mushroom? What does a couple of dead NPCs matter, or even a stolen good? Can a computer program even use a good? You do everything for the glory of your name. Even the good things are done so you can be admired. So you chase that nice armor and you chase revenge on the one who ordered your village killing, until you have to fight Jack over the most powerful sword in existence. The most powerful male fantasy erupts in your Mountain Dew as you fight to secure your sword. I mean Albion. Albion. And then you're faced with a choice. Keep the sword and kill your sister, or let it go into oblivion. The reason you started this journey is now the only thing that stands between you and complete power. You can continue to daydream and act as if it's all a game, killing some random NPC again, or you can wake up and go beyond the fairy tale. It might just be time to close the storybook and come back to reality, choosing something more real rather than the fantasy of becoming the greatest. You can say that all this stuff about the subtext of the ending, the UI, the cutscenes, the attachment to the character, oh, well, that was all a coincidence. That wasn't supposed to be designed that good. It was all just a happy accident. And maybe you're right, but it was designed that good. It's deceptively good where you don't even notice how many levels the power, fantasy, and themes of the game are happening around you. I've never heard anybody mention half of this stuff when talking about the game, because most probably didn't notice all of this consciously, but they understood they felt driven to play the game more. You might say it was easier to make the game the way they did in contrast to other RPGs of the time, but who cares if it was difficult to implement? I would rather have another shot at an RPG protag like this with similar mechanics, especially within the Fable franchise, than some high-priced, facial captured voice protag from some big list actor getting those big bucks, or having the most advanced facial character customization imaginable. Was it cheaper to have one protag all the time rather than having custom characters like other games in this period? Well, of course yes, but this game offers an experience none of those other games do. And conversely, more expensive and more choices does not equal quality. Just because you can put your money behind more expensive and complex game systems that are all the rave, that doesn't mean you should. Lots of tried and true mechanics have been lost in the shuffle in the chase after graphical fidelity and options. Every game's gotta be open world nowadays, chase those realistic facial animations based on mocap. What if a game was built from the ground up for mechanical reasons rather than for trends? I think you might find that there was an artistry that old classics handled limited resources and technology with. If you chase what mechanically makes sense for a lot of games, you might just find your game's budget and focus being a lot narrower than it used to be. Cheaper can be better. Simpler can be better. Fable 1 feels like a proto-GOAT. Other proto-GOATs include Assassin's Creed 1. The story is good and the gameplay of 1 is interesting, but boring, lacking options. Needs a little bit more pizzazz. Assassin's Creed 2 comes in with a bigger world, more interesting gameplay, upgrades, a better story, a better main character. This just made Assassin's Creed click. Smash Bros feels like a proto-GOAT with a small roster and limited features, while Melee hits a new record. Out of the ballpark. Look at all these characters, modes, maps, and this gameplay. This is the definitive Smash experience right here. Left 4 Dead 1 is cool and all, but come on dude, you know what you're playing if you get the choice. Proto-GOATs. Lots of games take until the second or third game to click and become that legendary experience, and Fable is so close. Fix the loading times, make the difficulty higher than Cakewalk, open up the areas, provide a story of the same quality that's longer, add more interesting gameplay features and diverging paths, add more complexity to the combat, make the world bigger with more enemy variants and crazier bosses, fill in all the smaller problems, and, of course, embrace what set Fable apart from the other girls. You can do a lot with Fable 1 as a foundation to get a GOAT. So did Fable 2. Reach this GOAT status? Well, you'll just have to wait until... No, it didn't. You'll have to wait until I make a review. If I even make one. And, you know, remember to like...